He's a man in a hurry, as I said in the paper this morning. He's in his second term. He's only got a couple of years left. He really wants to, say, I was the big man, I was the greatest president in US history, and he has to have something to show for all his bluster. So he was very keen to take action, and Netanyahu gave him an action to take. He didn't really think about what was going to come next. He's sort of outsourced that, I think, to Netanyahu.
Let us now welcome back to Drive. Here with us, James Jeffrey is still live on the line, the former US Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush. James, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you. Keen to get your thoughts in just a moment. I've been joined now here in the studio by Richard Spencer, the Times Foreign correspondent. Richard, good to see you. And here in the studio, as opposed to on a line thousands of miles away. And also Karin von Hippel, the former Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. Hello to you, Karin.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Karin. James, can I come to you first then? You heard the thoughts just a moment ago of a former official of the Biden administration who saw no reason, no logic in the strike on Iran that the President of the United States ordered a couple of days ago. Now, I'm assuming you disagree fundamentally with that. Tell me why.
You addressing me?
Yes, James, if you would.
Well, Barbara's a friend of mine, and she's absolutely right that the Trump administration has done a really lousy job of explaining to anyone, including the American people and British and others who are in this thing with us, what we're up to. But I'll try to do a better job. It was clear at the very latest after October 7th that Iran was on a collision course with the rest of the region, not just Israel, not just us, but the Arab states ultimately in Syria, Turkey. And Iran was decisively defeated by last year with the obliteration, a bit of hyperbole there, but basically the destruction of most of its nuclear program and the defeat of its proxies. The Trump administration wanted to finish the job. We in America have to focus on North Korea with its mini nuclear weapons and obviously looming China and Russia and Ukraine. We don't have the time to focus for years, as we have the last 20 years, on Iran. So the Trump administration tried to negotiate a deal. That deal would basically be some limitation on Iran's missiles, because that's a concern of Israel. But most importantly, it's clear that the Trump administration wanted Iran to give up enrichment. If they gave up enrichment, then that would mean the effective end of their their program for a nuclear weapon, and they can always rebuild it, even if we obliterated it. The Iranians said no. So at this point, what looks like the Trump goal is not regime change. Secretary Hegseth just said it's not regime change, but rather to decapitate the leadership and take out as much of Iran's offensive capabilities as possible, with the hope that they will not reconstitute. Whether we succeed or not, we'll see. But it does not look like the administration is trying to overthrow the regime at this point.
Well, let me just take one or two of those points in order then, if I may. I mean, you make the point that is not unlimited time to address the potential threat from Iran's nuclear program. But I'll put it to you, there was maybe more time. There were negotiations in train. They were going on. It seemed that the Iranian regime, they saw, how could they not perceive the threat off their own coast from two hugely powerful battle groups. They wanted to keep talking. It might have been possible, perhaps, to continue talking and arrive at some kind of progress before launching this war with, as you'll, I'm sure, acknowledge, its unpredictable consequences.
I've been in my share of wars. They're all unpredictable, and you shouldn't go into them easily. But I've also been in my share of negotiations, a lot of them with Iran over 20 years, beginning in the Bush administration. They were doing the same thing they did with the Bush administration and the Europeans, and then later with the Obama administration, and then with Trump in his first administration, and then briefly with Biden. They drag things out. They make minute little changes in their basic position, but the American administration was not there to haggle with the Iranians in Vienna and Geneva. It was there to say, tell us how you will end forever enrichment, and we will tell you what we will do in return for lifting sanctions and such. The Iranians showed no willingness to go down that road. So therefore, the United States decided there was nothing to negotiate.
All right, James, grateful to you for being with us. Do stay with us if you can. Value your thoughts. Richard Spencer, Times Foreign correspondent and a veteran commentator on this the Middle East scene. Do you share the view, Richard, of James Jeffrey that action was warranted and now?
I think where I would be a bit more cynical than James Jeffrey is this very important issue which he raised but didn't really sort of go into, of the whether Israel and America, whether Netanyahu and Trump want the same thing out of this action. My assessment is that Trump wants to take action. You know, he's a man in a hurry, as I said in the paper this morning. He's in his second term. He's only got a couple of years left. He really wants to, say, I was the big man, I was the greatest president in US history, and he has to have something to show for all his bluster. So he was very keen to take action, and Netanyahu gave him an action to take. He didn't really think about what was going to come next. He's sort of outsourced that, I think, to Netanyahu, and also outsourced it to his self-belief that he can sort of adapt his rhetoric to whatever turns up. So for me, the key person here is Netanyahu. He wanted to decapitate the regime. He wanted to end not just its nuclear threat. He wanted to end its missile threat. He wanted to weaken Iran. He didn't. If there's a regime change that ends up with a pro-Israel leader like the Shah's son Reza Pahlavi that we've all heard of in recent weeks, fine. If not, then a weakened Iran is great for him. Trump says things like, if you do what America wants, we can all get rich together, we can all have peace, we can all do deals. If that's how it works out, Trump will claim the credit. If it isn't, he will say, well, I ended the nuclear program, and that's what I always said I was going to do. Slightly contradictory, because he'd said he obliterated it in June. So, and there is no suggestion really that Iran has done a huge amount to reconstruct that program in the months since. He didn't quite obliterate as much as he said, as James Jeffrey hinted, but it did a lot of damage. So on Trump's way of thinking, there wasn't really a justification. There is no justification. There's no plan to rebuild Iran into a sort of pro-Western democracy, as far as we can see. But if it happens, he'll be very pleased about that, and he'll take the credit. Whether Netanyahu is justified depends really on whether you believe that his plan for Israel's future, which is this what they call a prickly pear approach of we don't care about you, all we care about is our own safety, and to hell with the consequences for everybody else. It depends on how you see that Israel strategy as regards Gaza, Lebanon, and now Iran.
Okay, James Jeffrey, we'll come back to you for your thoughts on what we've just heard there from Richard. But Karin von Hippel, formerly the head of RUSI, do you share Richard's take that we're looking at a president of the United States in a hurry and a leader of Israel who's really just driving the process?
Well, I have to say, I wish someone like James Jeffrey were in charge. I would feel a lot more reassured by what's going on, because as Richard's saying, the problem with Trump really is that you never know where he will come out even 5 minutes ahead of time. So yes, he could be overly influenced by Netanyahu. He's changing his mind constantly. I mean, I spent the day going through all of his comments about what his plans were, and it's everything from, well, the IRGC should surrender their guns to the Iranian public. This is the same Iranian public that has been killed by the IRGC and the militias. He talks about a Venezuela option. I want it to look just like Venezuela, when there are all sorts of reasons why it could never look like Venezuela. He says he doesn't want regime change if he has a Venezuela option, but then he says something else, that he wants regime change. And so I don't think he has the focus to stay on mission. I wish there were people like Ambassador Jeffries in the room with him and others who could keep him focused on the mission at hand. But as we all know, he goes from one thing to the other, and he veers all over the place. And so there is a huge concern. He's not communicating what he's trying to do well. And because of that, the American public isn't supporting this. I think 1 in 4 in recent polls are supporting it are supporting it, and 3 out of 4 say they either don't support it or they're unsure about what's going on. And so that's really the concern. And of course, he's dragging in other countries in the region who also don't really understand what the mission is and what the objectives are.
Okay, so the argument, James Jeffrey, in different forms, is that the President of the United States is making this up pretty much as he goes along. And as Richard put it He's more interested in taking action and then claiming credit or disavowing it, depending on a lack of success as this thing plays out. Just come back with your answer, if you would.
Thanks. Look, as Don Rumsfeld, our former Secretary of Defense, was saying when they were shipping me off to Iraq, you go to war with the equipment you have, the army you have. Well, you go to war with the president you have. And everything you've said about Trump is right. But folks, he is the American president. He will be the American president for the next 2.5 years. And much of the security of what we used to call the free world or the global system is dependent on this guy, however flaky he is, and however inept he is at explaining himself. Again, I will try to explain the underlying logic that there is a critical mass of thinking around Trump and around Washington. Iran, according to Henry Kissinger, had to decide whether it was a cause, that is a revolutionary expansionist cause like the early Soviet Union, or a normal state. And Iran has been brilliant, believe me, I've spent hours with these guys, of presenting itself through its foreign ministers, people like Zarif, as a state, when really they were a revolutionary, violent cause that just in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria alone were major contributors to wars that killed 1 million people from 2005 on. So, as I said, at some point, Washington decided, independently of Netanyahu, look, I know they're linked up, but look at how Washington has pushed back on Netanyahu on Gaza, forced a ceasefire down his throat, and frankly pushed back really hard on what he was doing in Syria. So they're not always linked up with us. We're not always linked up with them. But there was an idea in our minds, in the minds of the Israelis, and frankly, at the end of the day, in most of the states in the region, that Iran no longer could be in that ambiguous position of, well, we're really a state, but we're going to act like a cause. They were told when they sat down with us, you've got to give up being a cause. And the key thing there is to say you will never go back to enrichment. And because enrichment, believe me, leads to a nuclear weapon. I've read their weaponization files back in 2007 in great detail. They were out to get a nuclear weapon. They decided they didn't like that deal, and so there was really very little to negotiate. It would be more, how many centrifuges, how many years could they only spin at a certain percent and such. We all went through this from 2013 to 2015. This is not what the Trump administration wants. They want these guys to become a normal state. Normal states don't have weaponization programs. They don't enrich. So when they refused to go down that road, the Trump administration decided, as I said, to do something. We're not sure what, but what it now seems to have boiled down to is demilitarizing Iran to the degree possible to reduce to the maximum degree Iran's ability to threaten the region if it still wants to be a cause. That's simple.
Okay, now Richard, look, you know this area of the Middle East as well as anyone else. James Jeffries makes the argument Iran should be seen as a volatile, combustible element which had to be neutralized sooner or later, and better sooner.
Yeah, I mean, if it works, great. I mean, if you have a new, if you have a new Iran that is no longer a cause, that is a normal state, then great. There's two problems with what James Jeffries said. I mean, one is that I kind of respectfully disagree with him about this, causes don't have, causes have nuclear weapons programs and states don't. I mean, it's the exact opposite, of course. Building a nuclear weapon was the one thing that Iran did that made it a normal state. In a way, it was, it's how it defends itself as an unpopular state. It's how North Korea defends itself by having a nuclear weapon. It's how Israel does. It's how India, Pakistan, and of course the 5 permanent members of the Security Council do. So there's no necessary link between stopping it being a cause and taking out its nuclear weapons capability. Now, what, as I described earlier, what Israel's policy is exactly that: stop it being a cause. Say you will be a state, albeit a weakened state, but you will not have your cause capabilities, your missile programs, your proxies in Lebanon, in Gaza, and so on. Fine, if that all works, great. But if if Trump, and as Hegthes just said, the aim isn't regime change, then how do you leave a regime in place that is a cause, even if you've got rid of its whatever plan it actually had for its nuclear weapons program, which, to date had never created a nuclear weapon, but under a new supreme leader who may be, determined that is his goal as soon as possible, may have a nuclear weapon and still be a cause. So, how do we guarantee that that's not going to be the result of what Trump is doing?
All right. I'm told now, Karin von Hippel, former head of RUSI, that I need to wrap up, but I want to give you the last word.
B.
It's all yours.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, no, I mean, I have to look. We all want Iran to be a positive state in the international community, and we all want to see a denuclearized Iran. And we want the Iranian people to have, the agency, and they don't have any of that now. It's just that I think all of us are also equally concerned that once a war like this is launched, that it could go terribly wrong. It's a very high stakes gamble that President Trump has undertaken.
Okay, Karin. Thank you, Karin von Hippel there, the former head of RUSI. We've got Richard Spencer here in the studio, Times Foreign correspondent. And thanks again to James Jeffrey, who's the former US Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush.